Welcome everyone to the session on mixing intersections and unions. And without further ado, I will hand over to the first speaker, David Huss.
Hello everyone, welcome to my talk. Today I'm going to talk about provable anonymity guarantees for continuous stop and go mixnets. They have been around for 25 years, more than 25 years. They have also been deployed in practice by NIM technologies, but till now we didn't know if they actually can provide provable anonymity guarantees or not, or there are no rigorous formal security analysis for these kind of designs. This work has been done with Claudia Diaz, Aguilos Calles, and Thomas Zacharias. So when we talk about provable anonymity guarantees, generally we define anonymity in terms of indistinguishability-based definitions, where a global passive adversary tries to identify between Alice and Bob who among them has sent a message, where the adversary observes the network as well as the recipient might have been compromised. And the probability that the adversary detects correctly should be less than the probability that the adversary detects wrong, plus some slack factor delta, which is a function of the security parameter. And sometimes we want delta to be negligible, and then we call it strong anonymity. In this specific case, we are talking about the anonymity of the sender. That's why we are calling it sender anonymity. For this talk, we'll talk about anonymity notions that are related to sender anonymity or that are similar to sender anonymity. So the mixnet protocols that tries to achieve provable guarantees, they typically use some form of rounds. So for example, in this case, Alice, Bob, and Thomas sends messages together as a batch, and they also do layered encryption. And in the first round, the first layer, the mixnode on the first layer receives all the messages, and then it decrypts one layer, shuffles, and then follows the second layer in the next round. And in the next round, the next mixnode operates, and so on. And finally, probably the adversary is confused about which message was sent by whom, as long as at least one of the mixnode is honest. This we understand that, okay, if there is at least one mixnode is honest, that have shuffled, which we don't know how the shuffle has happened. However, how does continuous stop and go mixnet works? In case of continuous stop and go mixnet, each message is delayed independent of all other messages, following some probability distributions. In this case, we analyzed exponential distribution for delays. And then the hope is that during the time the message is in the node, probably some other message could have mixed with that. And some people also claim guarantees based on things like, okay, since exponential distribution is memoryless, if two messages come at time t1 and t2, and then one message leaves at time t3, you don't know if the message leaving at t3 came at t1 or t2 because of the memoryless property. However, it's possible that the first message could have left much before the second message has arrived. Or in general, the end-to-end delay for the mixnet, that itself is not exponential distribution, that is an LM distribution, because it's a sum of all the exponential distributions. And LM distribution is not memoryless, and of course there could be compromised nodes, and then the question is, how do we prove anonymity, or what this leaks, this LM distribution. To analyze that, as a first exercise, we wanted to analyze something we call FIFO attack, or first in, first out attack. So what's the setting? Each message is delayed following exponential distribution with parameter lambda, and users are also generating messages at a rate of where the time between two messages follows the exponential distribution with parameter lambda u. And in this given example, suppose the first message from Alice comes at time t1, the second message from Bob comes at time t0, the message from Alice comes at time t0, the message from Bob comes at time t1, and we want to calculate the probability that they preserve the order or they don't preserve the order. And we did not want to choose a specific good or bad setting, rather we wanted to do expectation over all possible such differences. That's why we chose such a distribution of sending messages. That Alice sends following the distribution, Bob sends following the distribution. and then what is the probability that they will swap order, or what is the probability that they will keep the same order. This is the probability that they will keep the same order. Let's try to understand this equation, right? Come on, no, I'm not going to do that. Instead, we coded the equation in a program and we plotted the equation. Here, rho is the ratio between lambda u and lambda. That means rho higher means that the users are sending messages more frequently. That means with high probability, the gap between the two messages is small. And if you can see, for a small value of rho, the probability is significantly high compared to 0.5 for the adversary, for them not to switch order. However, if you increase the rho significantly, and also if you increase the number of hops significantly, then it is coming close to 0.5, which is possibly good, but still, even for number of hops 20 or number of hops 40, the probability is something like 0.501 or something like that, even for rho equals to 64. So that could be somewhat satisfactory, but some people might be purists say, okay, 0.50 is still large, at least in the asymptotic sense. We did not do an asymptotic analysis, we did concrete analysis for this case. We did not want to analyze that equation. However, that means this could translate to attack in the real mixnet. And for the first definition that we consider, we call it pairwise unlinkability. This is similar to sender anonymity, but there are subtleties. For example, we assume that the adversary has background knowledge about when the challenge message has been created. So in this example, Alice and Bob are sending messages, and then the adversary says, this is when the challenge message has been generated. And that means if Alice and Bob, one of Alice and Bob has to send a message, the immediate next message from Alice or Bob would be the challenge message. And then they can possibly use the FIFO attack. And why this is relevant? This captures scenarios like whistleblowing, where the adversary might intentionally plant a message and see how the users react. This is a strong scenario, but this could still be relevant to capture such adversarial knowledge about timing when a message is generated. And if the adversary has such knowledge, in that case, we had a really depressing result, where with only 5 mixed nodes per layer, even with no compromise nodes in the whole mixnet, still the success probability of the adversary is greater than 0.9, which was really depressing. And I have to specify that this is upper bound. We also derive lower bound, but upper bound is the one which you can claim as the security guarantee. And they may ask, like, then should we give up, that there is no hope? And then we say that what if we take away the knowledge of the adversary, the background knowledge about when the message is generated? So in that case, the adversary is basically, suppose Alice sends a message and the adversary wants to track that message, how it goes to the network, and just based on that tracking, the adversary wants to break anonymity. And then can we get better results? And this is best typical to tracking scenarios. For example, typically in the network, the adversary sees a message on the recipient side and tries to backtrack who has sent the message. And we also do further relaxation that as long as the message from Alice mixes with any message from Bob, then we can call it that it is achieving anonymity. So that means all the messages generated by Bob are honest messages. And the adversary doesn't have background knowledge about those messages from Bob. And in that case, we get a pretty hopeful result. This is the upper bound on the success probability of the adversary with 5 mixed nodes per layer and with 10% compromised nodes. And still we show that there is drastic decrease in the adversarial advantage delta with the number of hops. So that's hopeful, so probably that's achievable. So the key takeaways from our work is you can achieve strong user unlinkability, but not so much about pairwise unlinkability. And of course, this work is not complete. There are so many things that are yet to be done. I mentioned about the background knowledge of the adversary, that the adversary knows exactly when the message is generated in case of pairwise unlinkability. In case of user unlinkability, we completely take away that knowledge. But in reality, there might be a scenario where the adversary has partial background knowledge. How do you capture such notion, and exactly how to model, and what kind of, how much knowledge to assume, and then what kind of guarantees can you provide? That is one interesting direction that we plan to continue working on. And then how do cover traffic impact those guarantees? With that, that's all I have. I would highly encourage you to read the paper for the actual proof and derivations, and if you have some questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
Is adversary passive in this?
Yes. Yes, it's a global passive adversary.
The answer is yes.
We did not yet consider active attack. Yes.
Sorry, I'm a little bit late, so I missed the very first part of this training talk. So my question is, how do you define that strong user linkability? Do you have like a formal definition of
Yes. I did not present the definitions because.
Can you just quickly explain what kind of intuition behind it? How do you like model the strong user unlinkability? Sorry.
User unlinkability is the definition. Strong means that the delta is negligible. That's the strong part. User unlinkability is basically Alice is sending messages, Bob is sending messages, and we assume that all the messages from Bob is honest. Now Alice sends a specific message and it pops up on the recipient side. The recipient is compromised and the adversary recognizes this is the challenge message. And the question is, then the adversary tries to figure out which message from Alice is or is it Bob or Alice sends the message. And that means as long as any Alice's message mixes with any message from Bob, then basically you achieve mixing. So it's basically between indistinguishability between users rather than messages. Does it answer your question? Or maybe we can discuss about the mixing later. Yes.
And some plots I've seen that basically you had a lot of hops, and each hop has this like Poisson distribution or Poisson distribution for like delays. Does it make it impractical? I mean, I want to catch a website and not wait like super long for it to load.
Now you are asking the question if do you want to implement a mixnet using Poisson distribution?
Yeah.
And what kind of application can that support? We do not answer that question in the paper. Yes, that's a different question in terms of practicality of mixnets and what kind of applications it can support. But the thing is, those designs are there and people are using those designs. Now we want to know if it is secure enough to use those designs. Of course, your question is valid, but we do not answer that question in this paper.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
You say people are using these designs. Your distribution sometimes had like 50, 100 hops in it. You're telling me that people are using mixes with where there's 100 hops in the message chain?
No. That was just to analyze like what kind of hops should you choose or what kind of security guarantees you get. Not.
Yeah.
Okay. That was not the intention.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's thank the speaker.